Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Dead Talk Live. Today we are joined by writer-director of the upcoming film Shepherd, Russell Owen. Russell, thank you for being here with us. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
I saw Shepherd last week. I really loved it. We're going to go into a deep dive in a few minutes here. I want to let our audience know that Shepherd is being released Friday, May 6th to theaters, and then it's coming out wide on video on demand Tuesday, May 10th. So you must be excited. The big day is almost here. I always love asking this question because I get a wide variety of responses. What's your feeling leading up to the release? Is it nervousness, anticipation, excitement? What are you feeling right now?
Um, Nervous because the reactions are always different wherever you go. So it's only ever been released in the UK. Now it's the US, and then from the US, then the rest of the world gets to see it. So I've no idea what people are going to think. So yeah, it's a bit nerve wracking, and it has been a labour of love to make it. So yeah, nervous but very interesting.
It's interesting as I was preparing this episode and I was getting it all scheduled. There are a lot of people that have questions out there, like the ending explained. Your review, your opinion on this movie, because it does leave people. You don't hand the movie over on a silver platter. You leave it a lot up to viewer interpretation. Before we get into that, I want to start off and talk about the cinematography. First of all, the location is just absolutely stunning. Was this shot in Scotland?
It was shot on the Isle of Mull, which is just off the west coast of Scotland. It's one of the more remote parts of Britain, and particularly the west side of that island. I mean, once you get onto the islands, if the weather's good enough and you get the ferry and get everything over there, then you've got another hour's drive to the other side, and the
Wow.
roads are tiny. You can't get trucks there, so not much had been filmed there before. And I had driven the length and breadth of the west coast from Wales and England and up through Scotland, and it was the last place I could find before having to patch a few other places together. And I turned around this corner. I remember it's on the other side of Mull, and I saw the view of what in my head would be the island from the top of this road coming around this corner. And I slammed my brakes and went, "Oh my god, that's it!" And we've been traveling for 5 days trying to find somewhere, and I didn't care how difficult the location it was, or how hard it was to get there, or any of it. I was like, "That's the island. There it is."
It's
Um,
absolutely stunning, especially when Tom is taking the ferry over and you see the three mountain peaks in the background. Ah, absolutely breathtaking. Now, a big part of this film is not just the location, is the special effects that you had to incorporate. I'm talking about the fog coming in, coming out. I'm sure the weather did not cooperate with you on the time that you wanted, and you had to bring a lot of that in terms of special effects. But it was beautifully done. How important were those effects to the location, to the storytelling of this film?
Yeah, especially with the fog that you mentioned then, it does get very foggy like that around there. And I grew up in North Wales, which is just further down the coast from where that is. And the second fog comes in, it does come over mountains like that and roars in. But there's no, it's every blue moon. Typically, I think the day after it did that. But uh, the the fog we had in, we knew we were filming for it to go into special effects, because the fog had to move in a certain way. It had to look a little bit unnatural, and it had to reveal certain elements at certain times. So there was some practical effects on the day. There were some machines in the distance upwind, so they were allowing some elements to come in, but most of it was CGI.
I gotta ask you this: seeing the effects in this film and how beautifully they were done, whatever your budget was, I assume a big chunk of that budget went into those special effects. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, I mean, we managed to get a good deal, but they are not cheap. Because when you're doing a film like this and you read it and you go, okay, well this happens, that happens, you can't go cheap on it. You've got to get the best effects you can. And I mean, we were very lucky. We had some very talented guys working on it, but it was a very limited number of shots. And then our grader could also do some onlining. I mean, it wasn't just things like fog. We had to rub out telegraph wires
Yeah.
and cars and little houses in the distance that people had built on it just to make it feel more remote, and birds, because there's not supposed to be any birds on the island. So we had to rub birds out in the sky. So it was a big challenge, certainly from that point of view. But yeah, we spent a lot of time on the actual CGI effects.
Let's talk about that the lighthouse and the shack that Tom stays in. Is that something that you guys had to build for the movie, or was it already there and it was perfect for what you wanted?
I stupidly just thought if I drove around the west coast of Scotland long enough, I'm going to find the ideal cottage and it's going to be in the ideal location. It's going to be easy enough to drive to all these kit and crew. And the truth of it was, everywhere I went, all those kind of places are now luxury Airbnbs,
Yeah.
writer retreats, and all the rest of it. So you don't get that old weathered huts and all the rest of it. And the lighthouse, I first went to Mull because it's got a beautiful lighthouse on one side, and that's also an Airbnb and very nice. So in the end, when it came to production, we decided we'd have to weigh heavily on the art department and build the cottage where it is, and also we built the base of the lighthouse, and then the rest of it was a 7 foot model. And we
Mm-hmm.
did Lord of the Rings type trickery to sort of fit it into the landscape. And all the interiors they were also built for the cottage.
Nice, nice.
And
So let's talk about the characters here, okay? The main character is Tom. Tom is a person who is riddled with guilt, broken relationships in his life. Let's talk about the guilt, the overwhelming guilt that Tom feels about his wife's death, Rachel, which sort of leads him to isolate, leave where he's living, go to this desolate island. When you were penning the script, was there any inspiration for Tom for you? How did you build this story around this main character, Tom?
well, originally, the story was based on a sense of isolation. So growing up again in Wales, there was you get a lot of ghost stories, and it's a very ancient landscape. So from medieval stories backwards to pagan stories and all the rest of it. And the Smalls Lighthouse story, which is the same story that Robert Eggers used for the lighthouse, was the first inspiration for it. Two guys trapped in a lighthouse off the coast of Wales.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe Robert Eggers was making a film when we were filming at the same time. Mine came out a lot later because of COVID and the rest of it. And Kate Dickey, who's also in the film, had worked with him, and she's like, "Oh, Robert's making a film." I was like, "What?" And but over the moon because I really wanted to see that faithfully brought to life. It was his famous Welsh ghost story, but the character himself, over the years, because I wrote this a long time ago, I used to take the script off the shelf and add to it to help build the character. And one thing that really informed it, I had a friend who lost his life, who was depressed, and he would give me a very good insight in how into how it felt to be depressed. One was it's like a horror film, so you're in a horror film,
Yeah.
which is what Eric, played by Tom, is
Yeah.
in this environment, which is like Hammer horror. So you have everything's a little bit off. The house is off, the cottage is off, the lighthouse is off. There's gas lamps. You've got the lightning. You have a traditional horror setting, but also he had an overwhelming sense of guilt, which he couldn't quite explain. So he wasn't guilty of anything, but he had suffered from that, and that was just a really interesting in. It's like, okay, so if I put this character in, what I need to give him a purpose. What's he guilty of? and I had written a whole first act with him and his wife, and then she dies. Um, which I removed, which only because it gave you way too much of an insight into their. So by the time he got to the island, you'd have a completely different perception of it.
Yeah.
So you gave too much information, and so and Tom's such a great actor. For him to know that first act and then to remove it when he plays it, he just adds all this intrigue
Oh
and,
yeah.
and
Was it hard for you to find your Eric Black when till you ultimately settled on Tom?
yeah, it was. It was. I had no idea when I usually write something. I've written tons of it, and I used to have like lots of famous actors in mind, and I had one or two, but they weren't. They didn't quite fit the mold either. They didn't look physically like they'd be able to go off on an island
Yeah.
and on sheep, or they were. I hadn't seen them in similar roles, and the same with Son. I hadn't seen Tom in a similar role, and there were some huge names getting put forward, which is amazing because it wasn't a big budget film,
Mm-hmm.
and people very keen on doing it if I could move the time to fit around their other films.
Yeah.
But Gemma Sykes, who's the casting director, the genius casting director, she kept putting Tom on top of the list and said, "This guy, you need to check him out." So okay, well, I've seen him play Prince Albert in the Victoria TV series, and I've seen him in a couple of other things, Ricky Gervais, Cemetery Junction,
Yeah.
but not this character. What makes you think he can do it? And she sent me an episode of Paula, which is a BBC drama where he plays this psychotic guy. And I must have watched about 10 minutes of one episode. And I thought, oh, well, yeah, okay, that's it. Yeah, is he free? Can he do it? Because no one's available. And he was, and I was like, oh, thank God. So,
So the
and it
pieces
was
fell into place.
exactly, yeah, and he's such a great actor. I mean, one, two takes, and he immediately knows exactly what you need.
Let's talk about Glennie Black. And by the way, I got to say, kudos to you for casting Greta Scacchi. Uh, it was so good to see Greta back on the screen. She's an amazing actress, and I was just delighted to see her back on the screen. Now, Glennie plays Eric's mom, and it's they have a very complicated relationship that doesn't really get explained except in dribs and drabs. She's upset at him for leaving her and her father, and not much is explained. How did you want to portray the dynamics between Eric and Glennie?
Well, funny enough, their relationship is based on somebody else's friend of mine's relationship with his mum that was so intense growing up. I remember going around for dinner and they would have these huge arguments about. And even today, obviously they don't live together anymore, but like I see them occasionally and have these really. And I used to find it so fascinating and a very sort of so it's an exploration really of that, particularly with being an only child, that maternal relationship, but with a huge jealousy for him to go up with anybody else or the
Yeah,
wife. And so that it's not that she really has anything against the wife; it's the fact that she has stolen him from her, and she lives alone with her thoughts, and she's lost it. So she's almost like what Eric could become because he's lost his wife and he was jealous because he thought she was having an affair and so
yeah.
on. So she's almost a reflection of his future. And again, going back to casting, I mean, Greta Scacchi, she's a Gemma said, "Oh, what about Greta Scacchi?" I was like, "Well, not going to be able to get Greta Scacchi." And then next minute, "Oh, she's read the script. Yeah, she's on the plane. She loves it." I was like, "What?" And she's like, because she still looks great, and she's like, "Can I have a wig so my hair looks rubbish and really dowdy clothes and all this kind of." So buried her in makeup, and she really just fit the part
Oh yeah.
beautifully, and looked like a proper old British weather-beaten farmer. She looked great.
Let's talk about the whole concept of shepherding and so on. What made you decide to make that like the family setting for Eric and what he knows to do. It just seems very old fashioned, very old school. Why was that important? And ultimately became the title of the film, Shepherd. Explain to us why was that so important?
Well, there's a lot of jokes in Britain about being Welsh, but we're very famous for farming sheep. And when I took that Smalls Lighthouse story, I wanted to change the job because over here, and it's famous all around the world, but every so often a job will come up on one of these islands to be a shepherd, and there's no one on the island, and it's like the most idyllic, perfect escape, and you get like 10, 20, 100,000 applications from all over the world, America, Japan, and like absolutely crazy amounts for everybody to do this one job. And in my mind, that's a horror film. Because if you're not in the right state of mind and you end up on an island completely alone, and it's one of the most beautiful parts of the world. It's incredible. It's very difficult to explain without being there. What it has a very spiritual essence to it. The west coast of Scotland and the islands in particular. Um, but they can also be terrifying as well because when the weather comes in off the Atlantic and it comes
Mm-hmm.
straight across the top of Ireland and just hits it like it can be. I mean, I was in the most terrifying storm I've ever been in, being up there. Um, and this is in no, I think it was in February. It doesn't normally have thunder and lightning
Yeah.
UK and at that time of year, and the lightning was so intense. It was like a tropical storm, but it wasn't just that; it was hitting the ground, and the whole place was shaking, and all the power was down, and the wind was so intense. It was absolutely crazy. But
Is
I
that the
mean,
storm that you depict in the film on his first night there?
yeah, but like not no. I mean, that was obviously all special effects and lighting and wind effects. Of it. It wasn't. If I was filming out in that, I think all the crew would have died. I mean, it was such an intense. And we thought the set was going to blow away. We had the back end of a hurricane with 120-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, it was because it's one of the windiest parts of Europe as well.
Yeah.
But we're going back to the shepherd. I mean, yeah, I mean, it did start from being Welsh, and that would be the natural job that you would do if you were out isolated somewhere in Wales. The sheep everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, but then taking it up to Scotland, isolating it onto an island, and basing it from those jobs you always see, those advertisements you see in the paper with so many applications, and turning that into a horror film.
Now, this film depicts trauma and guilt within, a person and what he's dealing with. What separates Shepard from other movies is that you did a great job in giving us a look into Eric's mind and what he is dealing with and the demons, his inner demons that he is fighting. Both as the writer and director of this film, was that a challenge for you on how to accurately portray it on the screen?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't done much before. I'd done a lot of commercials, very different ones. Commercials about whiskey or credit cards or fashion, like really glamorous models and celebrities. I'd never, and I'd done a zombie film, which I hadn't written, and I was like, just jumped straight into it 3 weeks. So I always saw this as my first proper debut, my first chance to get my voice out as a writer and director. And of all the films I've written quite a lot of screenplays as you do over 15 years of waiting, and this was the first one. And the reason I wanted to make it was because I wanted to get it out of my head.
Yeah.
I'd had all the imagery and the visuals for it in my head since 2005 when I started writing it, and in particular the cottage and all the rest of it. And when I picked it back off the shelf and I was like, great, I've been working on this 15 years and we got to storyboarding it, I was sending the script out. I recognise that all the actors, particularly Tom, was also there's not much to bounce off. You've just got the landscape and
Yeah.
there's occasional phone call and seeing visiting people in dreams and but other than that, it's largely him and his dog, and then the dog disappears halfway
Oh.
through the film. And so how are you going to interpret that? And I have always been, I mean, I've always been a big lover of cinematography, sound design, and putting every penny on the screen, and the storytelling comes through. So I had to be on my A game as a director. The storytelling comes through his costume design, the props that are in the set itself, the color palette, the uh, how the camera moves. Sounds, for example, a wave crashing on the beach isn't actually a wave. It's lots of bottles that are broken and then duplicated, but it
Yeah.
sounds like a wave. To create an overall painting of what it is, because the story it has to come across visually, and then it comes down to the decisions you make in the edit room as, are we telling too much of a story? Not. And
No.
I did have, like Kate Dickey's character, the fisherwoman in the boat. She told a whole backstory to the island. It was a brilliant, creepy story. It was amazing, but it just gave too much information. So when you got there, you were expecting all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
Whereas, as I've got it in the film, she doesn't give much away at all, and you already know there's something wrong about the place, so
Hmm.
you don't know what to expect. And so as a challenge, it was huge, and it was a huge one for somebody in my position to take, having not directed an absolute ton of stuff. But I thought if I can pull it off, then at least I can go, great, I've done that, and I'm very proud of it.
You did.
Proud of
You
all those elements coming together,
you
working together to tell the story rather than just dialogue.
you definitely pulled it off. Now, a final question. Like I told you in the beginning, there are a ton of fans that want the ending explained. Now, I know because I've spoken to so many directors. Uh, your answer is probably going to be, "What do you think the ending means?" But explain it because they want to hear it from the filmmaker themselves. The people that have the question, explain the ending to us. Of course, no spoilers giving away, but what would you tell them?
Um, well, in a practical sense, I always knew what the ending was going to be in my head. So I knew Eric's situation, and what I wanted the audience to do, obviously, is make their own minds up about it. But we had quite a few different scenarios, and there's only two people that know the actual ending and what actually has happened to Eric and where he actually is, and that's myself and Tom Hughes, who plays Eric. Um, Richard Stoddard, the director of photography, had a different scenario, so he followed that path. My production designer, Chris Richmond, had another completely different scenario. He followed that path. Um,
I
the
mean, I have my own
animator,
opinion. I have my own opinion as well, you
yeah,
know?
and what I did was I took, okay, is the witchcraft? Is his wife behind this? Is he going mad? Is he dreaming? Is he dead? Is he that? And so everyone had their own scenario, and you pick them out of a hat. And I give Tom Hughes the actual one. So, and we know that they all come together and they would all work through one scenario. But I think if I was to tell anything, if you went back for a second viewing, it's watching Tom's performance and some of the props and some of the storytelling, even in his flat very early on. There are very subtle answers in there
Yeah.
to the final reality, and that took a lot of playing around. And there are some people who never get it. Maybe someone in 20 years will go, oh, I was like, how subtle can I be without, being, and I watch it and I'm very proud of myself. but, but yeah, what I would say is, follow his performance and the elements that surround him, and there's all the clues are still there.
It's very rare for me, who talks to a lot of people, filmmakers, actors, to talk to someone whose movie's about to come out, and there's a real good possibility that this film might become a cult classic. History will tell in 10, 20 years, and it's very exciting to talk in the beginning, just before it hits the US, and to get it all out there. Guys, I cannot recommend this movie enough. Horror fans, thriller fans, drama, mystery. This is everything all combined into one picture. Like we said, Shepherd is being released in theaters in the United States May 6th. It's dropping wide on video on demand 4 days later on May 10th. Highly recommend it. You're not going to regret watching this film. It's a beautiful movie, beautiful story, and it's creepy and it's scary. Russell combined all that all into one film. So please check it out. Russell, I want to thank you so much for coming on our show. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share before we go?
No, thank you so much for having me. And if you're in New York, I'm doing a Q&A at the Cinema Village, or Village Cinema, Cinema Village, wherever that might be. I fly out tomorrow. That's this Friday at 6:45
Oh,
p.m.
that's awesome. I'm from New York, but I'm currently in DC. But if I was up there right now, I would go. I mean, I go back and forth from New York a lot, but man, I would love to go to that
Okay.
one. Anyway, thank you to Russell. Thank you to our audience for tuning in live. Thank you for all those who are going to be watching this later on. Again, the movie is Shepherd on behalf of Russell Owen, the writer and director of the film, and myself. Stay safe, stay walking. Bye, everybody.